Property investment can be life-changing. And not only can it change your life, but the lives of the people you care about around you. And that's incredible. But when you go on that journey, you're going to make mistakes. We've made loads, and unfortunately, we've seen lots of other investors make mistakes as well. So in this episode, we're going to give you some of the biggest mistakes we see investors just making all the time, so hopefully you can avoid them for yourselves. And the first one, oh, Rob, it's a biggie.
It is. The first mistake, which doesn't seem like a mistake, but really is listening to the media. If you've listened to the Property Podcast before, you know this is a bit of a theme of ours, but it's for good reason, because for the last decade, we've seen the media consistently send you in the wrong direction at every major turning point in the market. So when the market is about to boom and you'll be really rewarded for getting into property, they'll be telling you that everything's about to crash and it's a disaster. And when the market is actually getting overheated and it might be a time to be cautious or hold back, consider your position, they'll be pumping out non-stop headlines about how property prices are rocketing and they will do forever and it's going to be great. You have to get in now. It's incredible how inaccurate they manage to be. And this is really harmful, not just because they are guiding you the wrong way, but because they do so in such a dramatic way that it stirs up all this emotion in you. It's going to make you fearful of doing what you need to do. Property is a long-term game. You need to take consistent action, and you're going to be unable to do that if you're paying attention to what the media says, because at 1 minute, they're going to be super positive and you'll be feeling great. But then the next week, it's going to be doom and gloom, and it's going to stop you from doing what you need to do. We've recorded a YouTube video on this subject. It's called Property Investment Don't Do This. We'll link to it in the show notes for this episode, but it actually shows you a real example showing you the thousands and thousands of pounds that you would have missed out on by listening to the media over the last 5 years, compared to if you just completely ignored what they were saying and got on doing your thing. It's well worth a watch. So do check it out, because if you make this mistake and let the media be your guide, it doesn't matter what else you do, because it will make it so difficult for you to succeed.
The next mistake we see being made is believing the hype or the unrealistic marketing. You know what? When someone tells you you can make big money quickly from property, there will be a little part of you that wants to believe them. And they know that. And that's why they reel hundreds and thousands of vulnerable investors in year after year. The truth is, you can't make a fortune quickly from property with little or no money. Property is very much a long-term investment. You can become wealthy over the long term. You absolutely can. But the chances of you making it big in the short term from a modest start are slim to none. So when you hear about the next rent-to-rent strategy that allowed somebody to retire in 12 months, or the deal sourcing business somebody else has to earn $10,000 a month passively, be skeptical. I know it sounds like an obvious thing, but these people can be really convincing, and they will sell you the dream. They are trained to sell you a dream. And if you find yourself being slightly drawn into these adverts that you'll see out there, then ask yourself a question. If it's so easy to do to make quick wealth from property, why are these people trying to convince you to do it too? Why aren't they just doing it over and over again and repeating that special system they have? Well, the reason is it's a lot easier to sell the courses than it is to implement the strategies.
Very much linked to that is the mistake of spending all your money on training. It sounds insane, but people do it. Someone will have, say, £30,000 that they've got saved up, ready to invest in property. Then they'll spend that £30,000 on training. Well, how are you going to invest in property after that? It sounds totally bonkers, but people do it. There is a lot of very poor quality, very expensive property training out there. There is no need to spend anything on training until you've first exhausted everything that's free and cheap. When you've been through all that, then by all means, if there is something very focused that you need to get help with, that's going to specifically help the strategy that you're already committed to following, that you know is going to work, then it may be worth spending a bit of money. But do not spend big money on training, believing that there's going to be some secret that enables you to make back 10 times more. There are very few secrets in property. It might sound harsh to tell you now that there aren't. It's just a case of a lot of hard work. But if you believe us on this, it'll save you a lot of money in the long run.
The mistake that is the most painful to watch happening is people losing their momentum or motivation when it gets hard, or worse still, before they even get started. Property investment, as we've said, can be life-changing in a super positive way. But it's also hard, and it is a long journey. Like we said, you're not going to get rich quickly from property. So because of that, so many people give up. They do one property and then stop because it was a bit harder than they thought it would be. Or, as I've said, they don't get started at all. But there are things you can do to make sure you stay on track and you keep pushing forward. The first of which is to have that big goal, that motivation to keep you going when things get tough. But motivation is a temporary emotion. You're not going to feel motivated all day, every day. It's impossible. So you need to have more in your armory when things get tough. Something you can do is to have micro goals. Something that can be achieved in the shorter term. When it's closer, it's often more motivating to go and get it. A micro goal, if you're starting out, might be to go to a networking event and to find yourself a mortgage broker. That's not as intimidating as building out a multi-million-pound portfolio, but it will help you progress. So at every stage of that journey, make sure you're setting micro goals that help you progress forward. A tool that we've found incredibly useful over the years for all aspects of life, not just property, is accountability or having an accountability partner. This can be something formal or informal. It's basically having somebody who you're sharing your journey with and letting them know what you intend to do. And when you tell someone what you're going to do and then you don't do it, you kind of feel a bit rubbish. So you therefore feel more motivated to actually go and do it if you know someone's going to ask you about your goals and what you set out to do. Make sure that accountability partner will really hold you to account. So if you come up with weak excuses to why you've not pushed forward, that they've got the type of relationship with you to question that and point out to you that you are being weak and your excuses are rubbish. It sounds harsh, but it actually really works well. How do you find someone to hold you accountable? Well, you can go to networking events, meet other property investors. They don't have to be more experienced than you. In fact, if they're at a similar point of the journey as you, then you are going to go through the same things and you can share those experiences. So that may be even more useful than working with someone who's experienced. Or it could just be somebody who you trust and isn't involved in property, but they will ask the questions and say, how are you getting on? And if you really want to go hardcore, well, Google accountability coaches. They do exist and are not actually that expensive. So if you are completely dedicated to your property cause, then maybe get an accountability coach to really make you stick to your goals and your plans.
Another mistake that we see people make is to start on hard mode. It's very common for us to talk to people, often people who have been buoyed up by unrealistic marketing and training and things we talked about earlier, who are going to embark on a strategy of fully refurbishing properties 200 miles away from where they live, even though they're super busy, don't really have any free time, and have never done it before. Now, occasionally, we do talk to people who've pulled it off. It can work. But the reason that I can remember so clearly about the 3 times that I have heard from someone making that work is because it is so unusual. It's far more common for people to try that, figure out how hard it is, and then give up on property altogether because they've come to believe that property investment in general is too hard. No, property investment isn't too hard. Doing that was too hard for you. So instead of jumping right into the hardest difficulty level, start with the basics. Start with the easiest form of property you can do. Start with something you're comfortable with. Get all the help you need from different professionals. It might not be the most exciting, it might not get you the highest returns, but it will get you started. And remember, back in part 1, we talked about how the real learning comes from doing. You will learn so much from doing that first investment. If you do go on to do the more exciting, higher return, more ambitious kind of stuff, you'll do a far better job of it and you'll be more likely to succeed because of that groundwork that you've put in. So I'm not saying you can't do all this other stuff. I'm just saying don't do it to start with. You don't decide to take up running and then immediately head out the door and try and do a marathon. Start small, work your way up, and then you're far more likely to get to where you want to be in the end.
And once you've got that strategy in place and you are working towards it, then don't get distracted, because the final mistake on our list is shiny penny syndrome. Property investment is exciting, and there are lots of different ways you can approach it, and there are lots of different strategies you can adopt. But because of that, you can get distracted. But once you've found your system, once you've found your strategy that's helping you move towards your goals, don't go and start the shiny thing on the side or mix the strategy up a bit, because often that will lead to your progress stalling. Being distracted will probably mean that both strategies end up suffering. But if you stick to the course, ignore the shiny stuff, and there's plenty of it, and keep focused on the end goal in mind, while doing all the other things we've talked about in this podcast, you will have a brilliant property experience.
So if you manage to avoid all those mistakes, then you are setting yourself up to do extremely well. But if you want some help along the way, we've got a couple of services that you might be interested in. The first is that we help investors to build long-term buy-to-let portfolios and do so at a discount. We do that through a service called Property Hub Invest. You can find out more about that at propertyhub.net/invest. Or if you want to take a completely hands-off approach to property, we've got an app that allows you to access the potential benefits of property investment with as little as £1,000. You can find out more about that at portfolio.co.uk. But again, you don't have to use either of these. The whole point of this podcast is that we share everything you need to do it all yourself if you want to. And we'll be back with part 3, where we'll be sharing how we'll be investing in 2023.